Hey everyone, welcome to Prophecy Roundtable, Revelation 22. There's a lot of stuff in Revelation 22. We are going to unpack that tonight. I'm excited to do it. We have a special guest, though we've had a couple technical difficulties, so keep that in prayer. But we're going to have a great conversation about Revelation 22. Now, for you guys, because I know you guys are awesome, this is about the New Jerusalem. But there's some really curious things in there. Like there's some water coming down from God's throne. Then there are some trees on either side whose leaves are for the healing of the nation. Wait, healing? I thought we were in the eternal already. And then there are people outside the gates. Wait, I thought there couldn't be bad people anymore because it was all perfect. Well, okay, we're going to discuss that tonight on the show. And of course, I have my amazing co-host, Joel Blackford, here to dig into these things. Hopefully our guests can make it, but you never know. And just so you guys know, my internet is kind of on the fritz, so hopefully it'll all work out. But I'm excited to get into tonight's patch. Joel, I don't know, Revelation 22, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about Revelation 2?
I always look at Revelation 20 through 20.
We'll tell you what,
you can't.
I'll take it.
You can't hear. Okay, all right. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Doug, you're having issues with your internet. Okay, so people, can you hear us? Can you hear me? Can you hear Doug? And Eddie, I think, is still on the line.
Hold on, I hit to get in. Entering the studio.
Let's see if he's entering the studio.
All right. You guys can hear me. So, okay.
Oh, yes, Doug, no.
Revelation.
Oh, that's why. I can hear Doug, but you can't.
Okay, enter studio.
Hey, there's Eddie. Okay, all right. We're excited now. Okay, Eddie's coming on. Let me add him to the...
Wonderful.
Okay, I is here. Uh-oh, where's my sound?
Okay, so Eddie, there's my thumb right there. I can hear you.
Good.
Okay.
I can hear
Eddie,
you. So
Eddie, I hear you. You hear me.
Yes.
You can't hear Doug, right?
Not until he opens his mouth.
Well, Doug? Doug?
All right, go ahead.
Now I hear him.
So take it, Eddie. Tell us about Revelation 22.
Yes, please.
Revelation 22. Is this just an off-the-cuff subject? Okay, Revelation in chapter 22. Well, it starts out here by describing what Revelation calls the New Jerusalem, the eternal Jerusalem. And it says, he showed me a pure river, water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and the Lamb. In the midst of the street of it, on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bare 12 manners of fruits and yielded a fruit every month, and the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nation. So right here in the eternal Jerusalem, in the New Jerusalem, it says that there's a river of life that flows out of it, and on each side of the river is the tree of life, and it's describing eternity, because in verse 3 says there will be no more curse, but the throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it. So this the New Jerusalem, the eternal Jerusalem, is the place of the throne of God. And then it says in the King James, his servant shall serve him, and that's actually the word taken back to the Hebrew it's his bond servants shall serve him, which is another concept that I wrote a book about back in 1997, and that is the concept of the bride, and that there's levels of holiness in the kingdom of God, and that the highest level of holiness is going to be the bride that dwells and rules and reigns with Messiah in her eternal home, is the New Jerusalem. One of her spiritual characteristics is she is a bondservant. So it says, and the bondservant shall serve him, and they will see his face, and his name shall be on their forehead, and there will be no night there, and no a need for a candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God gives them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. So the New Jerusalem, the eternal Jerusalem, is lit, as it says in Revelation 21 and 23, by the glory of God. So it's not lit by natural sunlight, by the sun, or the moon. And it says they will reign forever and ever. So Messiah is going to rule and reign with his bride forever and ever. So that's what the first 5 verses is giving us a description of the heavenly, the New Jerusalem.
Eddie, why do we need the healing? I mean, Yeshua's already returned. We've gone through the millennium. What is there to heal after 1,000 years?
Well, it's making a statement of the completion of the redemption of all things from the sin of Adam and Eve in the garden. And so that promise of redemption is ultimately fulfilled here after the 1,000 years in the time of eternity, wherein the preeminent place is the New Jerusalem. And this is just making a statement that the tree of life, which is a term going back to Proverbs chapter 3 for the Torah, that the Torah and following the Torah has become the healing of the nations. Healing from what? A wound. What wound? The ultimately in the beginning, the sin from Adam and Eve in the garden. So this is describing the outcome, the end outcome, that the New Jerusalem represents the ultimate restoration and the ultimate healing from the sin that was originally done by Adam and Eve in the garden, which is represented and personified by the tree of life.
So, Eddie, could I run an idea by you? The Greek word is therapy, okay? And so healing therapy, I would think of every Shabbat to every Shabbat would be like a therapy for us to learn Torah better, to work on things that we've never thought about before. You know, it would be like therapeutic, you know? I mean, that's basically the word, you know? Would that make sense to you at all?
Of course.
Okay. So we're going to be going through, after the millennium, a therapeutic time of wait.
Let me let you complete your thought.
Okay, please
continue. No, you complete your thought because I interrupted.
Okay. So let me read it here. So the word therapy is here it is. Okay. So the leaves of the tree are for therapeutic needs of the nations.
Yeah. Okay. So what's your comment or question about the
phrase? The nations don't know Torah, right?
Exactly. So actually where it says here, the leaves of the tree, the pages of the Torah scroll are called leaves. Okay. So it says the leaves of the tree. The tree is the Torah. The leaves of the tree is the instructions of the Torah. So this is a Hebraic poetic way that's saying the instruction of the Torah is the healing of the nations.
That makes sense. And just like you would, have a tree for every month and you would have leaves for every day and things like that. Torah is a daily activity. There's a sweetness in reading the Torah and things like that. And so it's a therapeutic type of a healing that should occur for the nations then during this time.
I think it's describing an outcome, not it's because the healing has already been done, because in Revelation 22 verse 5, No, Revelation 22 verse 3, it says, and there will be no more curse. So if there's no curse, there's nothing to heal. So the thing about Hebrew is it may describe something and describe its end conclusion, and then come back and make a reference to it after it's already described its end conclusion. Okay.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I want to give you a scripture reference for this, what I said about
Sure.
leaves, okay?
Sure.
The
Go.
leaves of the tree. So in Jeremiah chapter 36, and verse 21, it says, so the king sent Jehudi to fetch the roll, or to fetch the scroll. And he
Okay.
took it out of the scribe's chamber. Then it goes on to say in verse 23, it came to pass when Jehudi had read 3 or 4 leaves. So
Okay.
what's he reading? He's reading the pages of the scroll.
Okay.
So the pages of the scroll are called leaves. So when it says
So it's poetic. Okay.
it's poetic. The leaves of the tree.
Yeah.
The tree is the Torah, and the leaves, or the pages of the Torah, is ultimately our healing, because the original problem was when Adam and Eve sinned in the garden, and they sinned because they disobeyed the instruction of God. They disobeyed the Torah of God. So we're not
Okay.
going to get the fullness of the restoration, the fullness of the healing. So actually the restoration comes in stages. And I made a comment when I was on last time that because the Almighty doesn't live in time, he sees the everything connected together. So the concept is, the end of the exile itself represents a healing, but it's not a complete healing. It's a partial healing. And then the Messianic era is a higher level healing, but it's not the complete and ultimate healing. The complete and ultimate healing is eternity in Revelation 22 in verses 1 through 5.
Okay.
So that they all, the end of the exile, when the punishment for sinning is exile. So when you end the exile, you're ending the punishment, and the punishment, the exile, is a curse. So the end of the exile is an end of the curse, but the end of the exile is not an end to sin. It's an element of the consequence of sin, the element of exile.
Okay, so let's spend a second on that, because you covered exile very, very well a few months ago, but that was a long time ago for our audience. So cover exile, just to give them a few sentences so that they understand when we went into the exile and now they're seeing as we come out of the exile.
So what is the definition of exile? Biblical exile. Biblical exile is the God of Israel exiling you from living in the land of Israel. So anywhere you live on planet Earth outside the land of Israel, you're outside the land of Israel, you're living in exile. Okay. And so the end of the exile is when you're when he brings his people back, who he scattered into the nations for breaking the covenant. When he brings them back from the nations and brings them back, and the tribes dwell in the land of Israel, that is the end of the exile. Let me give you a couple verses that makes a reference to that. And it says in Ezekiel chapter 47, it says in verse 21, and you shall divide this land unto you according to the tribes of Israel. And it will come to pass that you shall divide it by lot for an inheritance unto you, and the strangers that sojourn among you, they shall beget children among you. And they shall be unto you as born in the country among the children of Israel. They, the strangers, shall have an inheritance with you among the tribes of Israel. And it will come to pass that in what tribe the stranger sojourns, there shall you give him his inheritance. So in the return to the land, the inheritance of the tribe, his people is going to live in the inheritance of the 12 tribes. And those who are not physically descended from the 12 tribes, i.e. the strangers, they're going to be assigned, a tribe which is going to be the tribe of their inheritance. So the end of the exile is a return to the land of Israel, and this return is the job and function of King Messiah.
Doug is watching from the sidelines right now. He's having problems with his computer. I don't know if he can hear us at all. I'd love to have him dig into Ezekiel 47, verse 12, because it does talk about the healing aspect, but it's in the Hebrew there. So it's therapeutic in the Greek, but I wonder, and I don't have the Hebrew handy. Unfortunately, it's sitting in another room, but we'll ask him later on and see what the word is in the Hebrew. It's very interesting. So basically here, let me just read it to you, Eddie. Fruit trees of all kinds will grow on both banks of the river. Their leaves will not wither, nor will their fruit fail. Every month they will bear, because the water from the sanctuary flows to them. Their fruit will serve for food, and their leaves for healing. So whether it's therapeutic or not in the Greek, it is interesting. And Doug won't be able to join us. I don't think he has sound, maybe.
Well, in my Bible,
Yep.
For that verse,
Yep.
there is a cross-reference to Revelation 22, verse 2.
Right.
So where does Revelation 22 get its information from? It comes from the Tanakh.
Sure.
So this is one of the places in the Tanakh, in the prophets, wherein it's being stated in Revelation 22, and it's actually, at least from my perspective, it's being stated a lot more clearly in Revelation 22 than Ezekiel 47:12. It's harder for somebody to read Ezekiel 47:12, only that verse, and it's hard for them to come to the conclusion just by reading that verse that it's speaking about the New Jerusalem.
Okay.
But if you go to Revelation 22, because it quotes or make a reference to it, now you can more easily see that is referring to the New Jerusalem.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
we can now. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah. My internet provider just stopped providing internet, and they're going to have it back on by 10:15 tonight. So amazing timing, amazing days. But in Revelation 22, it does say therapenistos or therapion. So it's definitely therapy. And I totally agree with you, Eddie, that John is definitely taking from Ezekiel 47. There's no question there. And in my humble opinion, I think what Revelation 22 is talking about is not the so-called eternal age, that at least that's how I grew up hearing it, but I think it's talking about the millennium. I think that you have this, there's a need for people to be healed. People are still, they have the potential to die. The potential for death is still there. And these trees of life that are on either side of the river of life are there for the healing of the nations. So that's how I see it, but I might have missed something when you guys were talking.
Doug, Eddie,
I'm going to repeat. Go ahead.
Let me ask Doug real quick. So it's Rapha in the Hebrew, Doug. Do you have any comments about healing, the word Rapha?
Well, that's the same word as Rophe for doctor, so it tells you that there's something wrong, right? That's the point, is that there's something wrong. There's something incomplete. There's some sickness that needs to be healed. And if there's sickness, that means that there's still the potential of death. So you would only need healing if you're sick in some way.
Well, if you isolate the thought in that way, what you're saying is true, okay? But this is describing an outcome that has already been. It's describing an outcome.
Okay.
Rather than it's describing the present condition and in a future outcome. It itself is describing an outcome, because in verse 3, after it makes that statement that the leaves of the trees for the healing of the nations, verse 3 says, and there will be no more curse, and the throne of God and of the Lord shall be in it, and they will see his face. So they will see his face, and his name will be on their forehead. It's connected in thought to the healing of the nations. But
Okay.
I'm with you. But if you look down at verse 14, it says, "Blessed are those who do his commandments or wash their garments," depending on your translation, "that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates into the city. But outside are dogs, sorcerers, sexually immoral, murderers, idolaters, and whoever practices a lie." So, I mean, I know that I'm in a minority here, but I really do think that the New Jerusalem comes down during the millennium. I think that is something that only the redeemed can go into. If you are someone who has a mortal body, you don't get to go into the New Jerusalem until you get your immortal body. So it's there. It's a prize. There's an invitation from the Spirit and the bride. Say, "Come, anyone who's thirsty, let him take of the river of life," and come. So the invitation is open, but people still have to do something. They still have to, put their trust in Jesus, as it were, and come up to the New Jerusalem. They have to take of the river of life and then the trees of life. That is how they're going to be healed. And as you were saying in Ezekiel 47, it's the same exact language. So we see that this water that's going out from the threshold of the temple, and it's going out into the land, and it's healing the land. Well, it's the same basic effect that the tree of life is going to have for those who are deemed worthy to take it. But, remember back in the garden, right? So God places two special trees in the garden: the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life. And of course, we know that Adam and Eve ate from the tree that they weren't supposed to eat. And then God said, "Now look, man has become like one of us now, lest he stretch out his hand to become and live forever." And so God sent him out of the garden. I think if Adam had said, "I'm not going to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil," God have said, "Hey, look, man has now become like one of us," because the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was to force man to make a decision. He made the wrong choice. He could have made the right choice. And then God would have said, "Okay, now you can have of the tree of life." But of course, we all know how it turned out. But God is fixing that. And so we still have the opportunity to take of the tree of life one day. Those of us who have lived through this life, I think we already get to have it. But people that during the millennium, they will still need some kind of means to be transformed. And I would argue that the tree of life is specifically for that. I think the very simple language, the simplest, Occam's razor, take the simplest way of looking at it, is to say that the New Jerusalem comes down. And in Revelation chapter 20, we know that Satan and all the nations are going to surround the beloved city. What the heck is the beloved city if not the New Jerusalem? I mean, that is the city that Satan has wanted forever. That's the city that he's going to attack. And I think where we've gotten messed up over the years is that we have generally looked at the book of Revelation and said, well, this is a chronological book, and chapter 20 comes before chapter 21. But that's not the point. It's laid out thematically. So chapter 20 tells you the big events. Chapter 20 tells you what the city is like. But insofar as how they all fit together, 21 and 22 are telling you about this glorious city. And then it then fits into chapter 20 in the context of the millennium. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. I've written books and books and books on this. All right. So I'm not, that doesn't make me right, but it at least makes me somewhat informed on this. Okay. So, that's my perspective.
I would like to give you a Hebraic thought process on it. Okay. So I don't know whether you heard me before you came on when we didn't have your sound. I don't know if you heard my comment. So I made a comment that Zion is a concept that represents multiple things. I did a DVD, What is Biblical Zion? And I basically went over between 15 and 20 concepts associated with that word, okay? So I'm not going to now go over the 15 or 20 concepts, just one of the concepts. And one of the concepts is Zion, which is an alternative name for Jerusalem. It represents the end of our spiritual journey. Okay. And now I got to combine that thought. It represents the end of our spiritual journey. So the end of our spiritual journey is not just linear, because we're trained to think in time and we're trained to think linear. Okay. Hebraically, there's levels of holiness. So there's not just one Zion, that's the end of the journey. So the end of the exile is a form of the end of the spiritual journey, the end of the exile. So the end of the exile, I could show you some scriptures. The end of the exile is called Zion. Now the Messianic era, it is also called Zion, and it's associated with Zion. And then what I'm calling here the New Jerusalem, as after the 1,000 years, it is also called Zion, and they all represent an end of a spiritual journey, but it's represented in layers because there's levels of holiness. Okay, so the end of the exile is a completion, but it's not the fullness of the completion. The Messianic era is a completion, but it's not the fullness of the completion. But the fullness of the completion is when the 1,000 years, the Messianic age is over. So therefore, the end of the exile is a healing, and the Messianic era is a healing, and eternity is the ultimate healing. They're all described as being healing. So what we cannot do, we cannot put up a wall, we cannot put up a box, and we can't separate the 1,000 years. We can't separate it from eternity, because Hebraically they're linked, and the concept that's within the Messianic era is also same concepts that's in eternity. Okay, so therefore there is a tree of life that heals the nations in the Messianic era. There's a tree of life that heals the nations today while we're in exile. Okay, so as long as you or I are endeavoring to follow the Torah, let's say we're doing that, then it is our healing in our daily lives whenever we follow the Torah. But as far as the destiny of the nation of Israel itself, in the big picture, when it ends the exile, that is a healing. And actually, we probably don't think of it this way, but when we exit this life itself is a form of exile, because our eternal home is with the Almighty. So when we leave our eternal home, we are in exile. And so when we end our life on this planet, that is a form of our individual healing, because we don't have the suffering and the pain and everything that's a part of this form. So that the tree of life that's a healing is true and applicable at different levels. It's applicable today, it's applicable in the Messianic era, it's applicable in eternity.
Eddie, let me throw something by you. Doug brought up 22:12 and 22:14. Blessed are the ones washing the robes of them, that they will be right there to be the tree of life. So they have the right to the tree of life. So I'm in the Greek, and basically the washing seems to be more continuously washing. So it's not like one baptism and you're done. It's more like mikvah, I would assume, continuous mikvahs, and then the healing of the leaves too. Could I
You're
make
talking
that
about
work?
Revelation 22:14?
Yes.
So let's the way I commonly apply my use of the meaning of the word of New Jerusalem, I apply it in my thought process as I use the term. I normally apply it to the period of time that we call eternity. However, since Zion is an alternative name for Jerusalem, And the end of the exile, it's likened to a new song. A phrase that describes the end of the exile is a new song. And you're coming to Zion. I'll take you one of a family, two of a city, and I'll bring you to Zion. So Zion is Jerusalem. So when I end the exile, I've come to a new Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And so the end of the exile, the Messianic era, is a form and a type of New Jerusalem. But when the 1,000 years are over, I'm also in another level of New Jerusalem. But I'm still in New Jerusalem, but it's not the same New Jerusalem, but they're both called New Jerusalem.
Okay.
That seems kind of confusing. I mean, so
No,
I would say you got
Hebraic
New
thought.
Jerusalem.
Greek is one or the other. Okay, that's Greek. And Hebraic is it's both, or it's multiple things on different levels, all in a different application. That's Hebraic. Okay, go ahead.
You're going to get pushback. Go for it, Doug. Come on.
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's the same. It's the same city that Satan was on. We're told that it's the mountain of God. We've seen this city before. It's not so much challenging. I think we can expand the idea that this is the same city that God has always occupied. This is the city that Satan wanted to take over in Ezekiel 28, in Isaiah 14. It's the city, the blessed city in in Psalm chapter 48. Right, great is the Lord and greatly be praised, and the city of our God is holy mountain. Beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, right? That's the same reference to Yahweh Tzafon that is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 14, where Satan, wanted to take over that city. We see that, Hebrews chapter 12 tells us that we've come to the new Jerusalem, right? You've come to Mount Zion, to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. So we've seen this city before. And so, all I'm suggesting is that the city comes down 1,000 years earlier than what is traditionally, especially the dispensationalists teach. I suggest that it comes down, shortly thereafter when Jesus comes back. The city comes down, I don't know, days, maybe weeks later, but it's not a long time. It comes down right at the beginning of the millennium. You can only go into the city if you have a new body, because nothing defiled will ever enter into the city. And I think Revelation 22, 14 and 15 really strengthens that argument, because it says that outside of the city are dogs and sorcerers and idolaters, etc. So, we really seem to have this dual relationship going on, where people in the city have been completely transformed. They have their new bodies. Outside the city, people still have options. They have the possibility of going, rogue, going bad, or going good. So I don't think that we have to necessarily say this is Hebraic or anything like that. I mean, I understand. I mean, the New Jerusalem is going to be there for all eternity, and I'm totally chill when death is finally 1,000% gone. That's going to be awesome. I mean, amazing, right? But also, at the end of the millennium, there's not going to be a huge war. Like, Satan's going to go out. He's going to get the nations. He's going to rile them up, and let's go, attack the city. And I think God's just going to be sitting by. He's like, whatever. And what's so, according to my research, how this whole thing is going to come down is that the sacrifices for Yom Kippur have been keeping people alive that don't have their new bodies yet. They have been getting an act of mercy on God's part. It's basically a force field, a shield that is allowing them to exist with God's fire, his fiery presence all around. And every year, that Yom Kippur sacrifice is being done again and again, year by year, so that they have this covering. And then Satan is let out for a short time, which, according to Daniel chapter 7, he's let out for a time. Instead of a time times and half a time, he's let out for a time So he gets 1 year to go out and to get the nations, to get them to say, hey, we don't want Jesus as our boss. Let's go attack the city. And of course, they're going to surround the beloved city, and then basically the clock runs out. The clock of the Yom Kippur sacrifice that has been protecting people is going to just come to an end, and that sacrifice will disappear. The covering will disappear, and then the fire that's been there, God's fiery presence, will simply consume those people, and that'll be the end of that. And then we'll go on. There'll be no more contest, no more dissenters. Everyone that's now in the kingdom is there because they want to. They have fully submitted to God. No one is thinking braggadociously about themselves. They're all really excited to be there. And then we enjoy.
Where are you finding this Yom Kippur sacrifice, Doug? Where are you finding that in the text?
Well, so yeah, I'm stitching a couple things together. So
probably
what I'm looking
40,
at
45.
40 verse 1 talks in reference to Yom Kippur. It's the 7th month and stuff like that. But I can't find the specific Yom Kippur sacrifice, so I'll have to dig on that one now.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, so here's how I'm understanding this, is that Satan is going to probably be put into the abyss on Yom Kippur. All right. So I'm looking at the fall feast, right? If Jesus comes back on the Feast of Trumpets, which I think he does, the judgment is going to be happening on Yom Kippur. We know that Satan is thrown into the abyss around that time. So yeah, I'm speculating a little bit that he's thrown in on Yom Kippur. And
at the end,
and then,
tail end,
and then 1,000 years to the day, he's going to be let out. And then a year after that is when that final Yom Kippur sacrifice will come to an end. And it's that sacrifice, the atoning, the covering, the kafar, that is what is covering people and allowing people that are mortal to be in God's presence. Right now we have the general veil between heaven and earth. We see that in Ezekiel chapter 1. We see it with the baptism of Jesus. We see it at the stoning of Stephen. And then Revelation 19, the heavens were opened. We know that there's a veil between heaven and earth. Isaiah says, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down. So this veil, Isaiah chapter 25, the veil that is over all nations, he's going to take that away. And when that happens, when this general veil is taken away, then Jesus comes back in flaming fire. And the earth is going to experience that flaming fire because there will be no more protective veil protecting the earth and all of its citizens. So then what happens is then there's an individualized veil for the mortals during that time. Many of us are not going to need it because we're going to have our new bodies. It's going to be a great time. We're going to be ruling and reigning with Jesus and, doing our thing. But for those that don't have that new body, they're going to need that. And I believe that is why you have the sacrifices going on for 1,000 years. It's not just, a flashback to former times, as some people suggest, or, it's just kind of a memorial. I think it has a real form and function. I think those sacrifices are going to be a temporary covering, and they're going to be efficacious. They're legit, and they're for the people that don't yet have their new body. And the way to get your new body is to take of the river of life. In Zechariah 13, it says, in that day a fountain shall be opened for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem for sin and for uncleanness. Right? So this river of life that we see flowing out from the very throne of God, I think it's going to flow down the sides of the holy mountain, the New Jerusalem. And then one of those streams is going to go into the temple. It's going to then go under the threshold of the temple. And then it's going to go down to the Dead Sea, et cetera, et cetera. But wherever that river goes, things begin to heal. And then if people are putting their faith in God, they want to believe in Jesus and all that stuff, they want to submit to his rulership, then they can take of the river of life. And we first had to have the river of life before you can take of the tree of life, right? Because if man had taken of the tree of life back in the Garden of Eden, well, that would have been big trouble, because man would have lived forever in a polluted state, in a corrupted state. And so Jesus had to do all of his amazing work on the cross, et cetera, so that he could open up those rivers of life for those of us that believe. And that's how we can be healed, how we can be cleansed. And then once we've been cleansed, then we can stretch out our hand, take from the tree of life, and it will be for the healing of the nations. So all I'm doing is I'm just taking all the scriptures and I'm just saying, okay, what if we took these literally? What if these actually were for healing, like it says, and if they had a real function? And so I wrote a whole book on this, trying to figure out how this all comes together. And it's incredibly exciting how it all comes together. I was really jazzed to figure it all out. So that's all I'm suggesting, that we are going to enjoy eternity with God. Absolutely. In the New Jerusalem, sure, of course. But as we're looking at Revelation 22, and I would ask you, Eddie, how would you explain that outside the city gates are dogs, sorcerers, idolaters, etc.?
Okay, I'll answer that, but I want to clarify myself on something previous because I don't like being misunderstood. Okay, I don't mind if somebody disagrees with me. I just don't like being misunderstood. Okay,
Sure,
so
of course.
so when you said that the Messianic era is the New Jerusalem, I agree. I agree.
Good, awesome, wonderful.
The point that I was making is that's just not the one and only definition of it. The Messianic era is the New Jerusalem, and then after the 1,000 years is also the New Jerusalem. They're both the New Jerusalem. So therefore, I agree that what you said, I do not disagree with what you said. I'm just saying it's bigger and more broad than what you said. You only truthfully shared one dimension. I'm just saying there's another dimension in addition to what you truthfully shared. That's my point.
Awesome. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay. So now this, I wrote a book. You said you wrote a book. I wrote a book in 1997 entitled "Who is the Bride of Christ?" Okay. And it was intended to be written to the church. I'm answering your question about those that are outside. Okay.
Please.
Okay, so it was intended to be written to the church because when I initially went to church, my teenage years into my 20s, the only thing I heard by going to church is that the church is the bride. And they defined the church as everyone that believed that Yeshua is the Messiah and accepted them as the Messiah and received his shed blood for the forgiveness of their sin. That is in their teaching, the church. And so that church, everyone that believes that Yeshua is the bride, is the Messiah, is the bride. And so I wrote this book to dispel that thought, and going back to explaining it in the Hebrew culture, there's actually two stages of the marriage, not one. So we describe it as one stage of the marriage whenever you accept Yeshua as your savior. But that first stage, which Christianity refers to, is actually the betrothal stage. It is a marriage. Betrothal is marriage, but it's not the fullness of the completion of the marriage. Okay, so once you are married, as we have the example in Matthew chapter 1, 18 to 21, once you are married, once you're betrothed, it is possible that that you would not complete the marriage and go into the second stage where you dwell with, that it is possible for your bridegroom to reject dwelling with you after you've been legally married and after you've been betrothed. So I wrote this whole book to convey the concept that we get this thought about bride in, out, but actually back to the concept that there's levels of holiness, and the principle is from Hebrews chapter 8 verse 5 that heaven is a tabernacle. The earthly tabernacle was a pattern of the heavenly tabernacle. The heavenly tabernacle is a picture of the condition and situation in eternity. So in the earthly tabernacle, as our visible example, there were levels of holiness. The outer court was the lowest level of holiness. Then the higher level of holiness was the holy place. And the highest level of holiness is the Holy of Holies. Now to take that tabernacle was a blueprint of heaven or a blueprint of eternity. The Holy of Holies parallels to the highest level of holiness in eternity, which is the bride, that is a bondservant that lives forever and dwells forever in the New Jerusalem. And the Holy of Holies conceptually is associated with the eternal Jerusalem. But eternity or heaven is more than it's not just Jerusalem. It's not just the Holy of Holies. There's an outer court of eternity. And that outer court is a lower level of holiness. In other words, it's possible for you to accept Yeshua is the Messiah, but you failed in your service to him. Therefore, you can be at the lowest level of holiness in the kingdom, in eternity, spending eternity with the Messiah. We're told the concept that there's different levels of holiness. In 1 Corinthians in chapter 15, where Paul asked the question in verse 35, some men will say, how are the dead raised up and with what body do they come? So he's answering that question. And in answering the question, he says in verse 39, all flesh is not the same flesh. So he said, how are the dead raised up? In other words, not everybody will be the same. There's one kind of flesh of men, another flesh of beasts, another of fishes, another of birds. Then he says there's celestial bodies, bodies terrestrial. The glory of the celestial is one. The glory of the terrestrial is another. There's one glory of the sun, another glory of the moon, another glory of the stars. One star differs from another star in glory. So is the resurrection of the dead. So what is common in his description about the resurrection of the dead is glory, 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 glory. So everybody that's going to spend eternity with the Messiah is going to have a glorified body, but that glorified body is not going to have the same level of glory. The highest level of glory is the bride that enters into the second stage, who has the spiritual characteristic of a bondservant. In other words, she lived her life, gave her life for the Messiah, lived for the kingdom, etc. Those, let's see. I'll show you this concept one other place, although it's not the only place in the Bible, but it says in First Corinthians chapter 3, verses 13 to 15. It says, every man's work, that is his service to the Lord, shall be made manifest, for the day will declare it, because it shall be revealed by fire. That's by trial and testing and persecution and the work of the Spirit, etc. And the fire shall try every man's work of what sort it is. If any man's work abide, this is not talking about salvation. It's your service to him in being saved. If any man's work abide, which he has built upon, he shall receive a reward. What? A reward for service. If any man's work shall be burned, he will suffer loss. What loss of what? Loss of reward. But he himself will be saved, set yo by fire. So one group is saved and has no works. Another was saved and they do have works. So the works, one description of the works is being a bondservant. You served in the form of a bondservant. You did everything required of a bondservant. So that is the high level of reward. So you're going to be in that Jerusalem. In that, but now if you have the lowest, that your works are burned, and you believed in Messiah, but yet lived a carnal life, and that is possible. And we don't teach that. We don't. That's not in our thought process. But in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 again, Paul says, he says in verse 1, I, brethren, could not speak unto you as unto spiritual, but as unto carnal, even as a babe in Messiah. So he just called babes in Messiah as being carnal.
Okay.
And so so it says, verse 3, for you are yet carnal. Now they're believers, but they're carnal. And there's among you envyings and strife and divisions. Are you not carnal and walk as men? He's not talking about unbeliever. He's talking about believers. And then in Romans chapter 8. Now remember, a carnal here is defined as a babe in Christ, a babe in Messiah. And so in Romans chapter 8, verse 6, it says, for the carnal mind, to be carnally minded is death. It's possible to be a believer in Messiah, a babe in Messiah, but you're carnal. And to be carnally minded is you're walking in death. You're not walking in Torah. You're not walking in the blessing. And it goes on to say, verse 7, Hebrews 8:7, the carnal mind, in other words, somebody that's a carnal, that's a babe in Messiah, that's carnal. He's not subject to the Torah of God, nor indeed can he be. So it's possible for you to be a believer in Messiah, for you to be carnally minded, for you to not follow the Torah because you're carnal, because you're immature, you're spiritually immature, you're not spiritually minded. Paul said, I want to talk to the mature, the spiritual. I don't want to talk to the carnal. So those that are believers in Messiah, but yet they lived a carnal life and they have no reward, they're going to be spending eternity in the outer court of heaven, you might say, the outer court of eternity. And what is a description of that outer court? The outer court is a believer that's carnal. And a believer that's carnal, what does he do? A carnal person serves the flesh, as Paul said in Romans chapter 8. And in serving the flesh, now they're going to have the characteristics of Revelation 22, verse 15. So outside, that's outside of the city. And it describes these behaviors that are of the flesh, the behaviors that are carnal. And so in this verse, in this context, it's describing carnal people that will not be spending eternity and living in that in the heavenly Jerusalem, because it's just for the bondservants. It's just for the dwelling bride.
Eddie, real quick, when you're talking about the dogs, the sorcerers, the fornicators, people like that, idolaters, murderers, the dog term, is that a typical Hebraic term, which would be the male cult prostitutes? Is that how you would take that?
Well, that is quite likely. I would have to study it out, but that is one application. Okay, so now, independent of what I just said, if I just take those characteristics in and of and by themselves and isolate them,
sure,
those are also the characteristic of the unbeliever that's not going to be in eternity with Messiah.
Okay.
So the unbeliever is going to be carnal, and it's possible for the believer to be carnal as well. Except for the believer has received Messiah, but they're still a babe in Messiah, and they never grew up. They never grew up in spiritual maturity. They remained carnal. They remained a babe. Okay, and they're going to walk in the flesh.
So help me. So the bottom line is, this is interesting. This is Revelation 22. Sarx is the word for flesh, and so it's carnal. And that would be basar, I assume, in Hebrew. I can't find that anywhere in the Torah. The people would be living. What?
Can't find what?
Sarx or basar, living this fleshly life in Torah. So Paul is obviously, well, this is John here, but they're Paul and Romans and Corinthians, they're kind of spinning off Torah somehow, but I don't know where. And so where do you think they're spinning this sarx basar off?
What? No, what's the question? I'm trying to understand your question.
The question is that there seems to be this fleshliness that's outside of the city.
Right.
Where is that found any other place than Revelation 22?
Well, it's not. I don't think it's found any other place in Revelation 22, but it is found. The concept is found throughout the rest of Scripture, and I gave you a few examples.
And Paul, but Paul's pretty technical.
Yeah.
But you did a good job on him. It's just that it seems like it. Okay, my argument on Revelation 19 through 22 is it's rather unique in scope. It isn't a Torah concept at that point in time. You can't find other scriptures that match up, especially with 22. There's nothing where you can say, well, this is Deuteronomy 30 or whatever it happens to be. There's really nothing corroborating this as the second witness.
Well, in a Hebrew context, what you just said is totally true, and what you said is not quite true. It's both at the it's
Go
both
for it.
at,
Go for it.
it's both at the same time. So if you're
Okay.
talking at the Peshat level,
Yep.
okay, I think maybe you have an argument. Okay, but as you know, the understanding of Scripture and understanding of Torah is not. It's not just the Peshat level.
Right.
Okay, and so basically,
So people, the Peshat level is way up here. There's a Drosh level, and then there's the Sod level way down below.
well, let me give
And
you
you're-
let me give you a good example. Okay, in Luke chapter 24. Okay,
Luke 24.
yeah,
Okay.
and in Luke chapter 24. Okay, it's Yeshua is speaking.
Yep.
And he says, in verse 25, beginning in verse 25, and he said to them, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have said, all the prophets have spoken.
Sure.
Ought not Messiah to have suffered these things to enter into his glory? And it also says here that he was to die and rise again the third day. When he's speaking about what the Messiah would do, and it says beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded them all the things concerning himself. So there is no Peshat verse in the Tanakh. There is no Peshat verse in the first 5 books that says the Messiah is going to die, and 3 days later he's going to resurrect again.
True.
There is no Peshat verse, but Yeshua claims that the Torah and the prophets taught that.
Right.
So if it's not one explicit verse, like you made a statement that there's not an explicit verse. Well, you're right. Just like there's not an explicit verse that says the Messiah is going to die and 3 days later. So how is it there? It's there at the hint level. It's there at the principle level. It's there. It's there in the Hebrew. It's there in type and shadow. It's there in the various stories that we're told, and the people that's a part of the stories. They represent spiritual, principles, and Paul even said in 1 Corinthians 15 that the Messiah was supposed to raise the third day according to the scriptures. There is no explicit verse. There is no Peshat verse that says Messiah is going to resurrect on the third day. Okay, but yet it's there. So once again, like Doug, I'm agreeing with you about your statement. I'm just saying that that's not the fullness of the understanding of the statement.
Okay, it is interesting. I mean, you connected the dots well. That the fleshly people will be outside the walls, and I see the purpose and things like that. It's just that we obviously will just continue on, Eddie. That's fine. So where were you going with this? The fleshly people are outside the walls. They're the dogs. They're the sorcerers.
I was just answering Doug's question. That was not something that I brought up by myself. I was just answering his question because he asked the question.
Okay, so we have the healing. We have, and it seems like they're washing continuously. Would you say, Eddie, that's like mikvahs, like common mikvahs on a daily basis or a weekly basis or something like that?
Well, I don't know whether it's Peshat.
Okay.
But in Ephesians chapter 5, it says washing by the water of the word.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Sure.
Okay.
Although we do have a literal river up in heaven, rather in the New Jerusalem, we'll have a new river.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about in Ephesians chapter 5.
Not really, no.
Well, yeah, it says in verse 26 that he might sanctify it and cleanse it by the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious congregation, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but it will be holy and without blemish. So this is not Ephesians 5:26 is not talking about a literal mikveh when it talks about the washing. It's talking about a work that's done in our hearts through the Holy Spirit. Okay.
It's Hydata and Rhema, so it's interesting. So it's water, but in the Rhema. So Interesting. Okay, in the word.
Okay, so but this back to this New Jerusalem concept. Okay, I'm gonna try to give you like that. There's these levels. There's levels of application. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a problem is we're wired to think it's either this or that. Either or is Greek. Okay.
Sure.
Hebrew is, remember in the Fiddler of the Roof, the rabbi said, "Oh, you're right," and he says, "Oh, you're right," and it says, "Well, you can't
Sure.
both be right," and you're right.
Right. Okay, sure.
The idea was that there's multiple views and they can be right. Okay, so like in Jeremiah chapter 31 and verse 31, it says, "Behold, the days come that I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah."
Okay.
And then in verse 33, "And this will be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel." Verse 34. So it's describing the new covenant.
Sure.
And it says, "And they shall teach no more every man his neighbor and every man his brother to know the Lord, for they will all know me from the least to the greatest." Okay, so verse 34, we are not yet living in verse 34.
No.
But I believe that we are in the new covenant, but we're not in the verse 34 level of the new covenant. Okay. So we generally think that there's just like one new covenant that was made and we're in that new covenant. Well, once again, we're in the new covenant now, but we're not in the fullness of the new covenant. The fullness of the new covenant is yet to come. So there's levels of the fullness of the new covenant. So we're in the new covenant while we're in exile. And then we're going to be in the new covenant whenever we get to the 1,000-year Messianic kingdom. And then the fullness of the new covenant is eternity. There's levels to it. Okay. And in eternity, like what? Even in the kingdom, even in 1,000 years, the nations are going to go to Jerusalem to learn the Torah.
Sure.
So they're still going to be teaching somebody to know the Lord. Okay. But in eternity, no one's going to have to say know the Lord, because in eternity, those that are with the Messiah forever, they're all going to know him. From the least that's in the kingdom, notice there's a least, from the least to the greatest. They're all going to know him. And everyone that's in eternity, he won't remember their sin anymore.
Okay, I hate to do this to you because you were on a roll, but there's the dogs, the sorcerers, all these people. So you're saying that from the least to the greatest, aren't those guys living in the flesh and the sarks, the dogs?
No, it's not. It's not describing how they are living in eternity. It's describing how they lived when they were on the earth.
Okay,
that's describing the outcome of the lives that they lived.
Will all know me. Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So, should we get back to 22, or do you want to go on a sidetrack?
Well, I didn't know for sure how you wanted to go, and you started asking questions about Revelation 22. So that's what we spent our time doing. So we can go wherever you want to go, because you're kind of like.
I'd like you to cover 22.
You're kind of like steering the ship.
We do that. So,
keep
Doug,
going.
Do you have any questions?
Really interesting, please.
Okay.
No, I just say keep going. It's great. It's really wonderful.
Okay, so we've kind of covered chapter 22, verses 1 through 5. Do you think there's any other details that you need to cover, Eddie, on 1 through 5?
Well, the rest of Revelation chapter 22 isn't necessarily describing, what verses 1 through 5 are describing. Because he says in verse 7, "Behold, I come quickly. Blessed is he that keeps the saying and the prophecy of this book." So in verse 7, he hasn't come yet. Okay. Verse 7, he hasn't come yet, but in verses 1 through 5, I mean, it's the completion of. I mean, even if you say that, I mean, like I said, it's not one or the other. I'm not arguing it's one or the other. So whether you say it's that Revelation 22 verses 1 through 5 is describing, at least part of the verses are describing the Messianic era or after the Messianic era, even if it's describing the Messianic era, Messiah comes before the Messianic era. Okay. So verse 7 is describing that he hadn't come yet. It's just saying blessed that he is going to come quickly, and blessed are those that, are faithful unto his coming, his coming. And so now, in verse 8, it says, I, John, saw these things and heard them, and when I heard them, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel which showed me these things. He's now describing him and living his life, and he's describing what's happening to him as he's seeing or recording this vision. So verse 8 is not the Messianic era. Verse 8 is not, the eternity. Verse 8 is John's personal life and what's happening as he's receiving these things and declaring them. And so he's now being told, I am your fellow servant of your brethren, the prophets, of them which keep the sayings of this book, worship God. And now John's given an instruction for him giving this information at his time, at that moment. He says, seal not the sayings of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. So now verse 11, he's just making a general statement. Just a general statement. It says,
Sure.
He that is unjust, let him be unjust. He that is filthy, let him be filthy. He that is righteous, let him be righteous. He that is holy, let him be holy. So verse 11 is not trying to talk about the time of exile or the time of the 1,000 years or the time after the 1,000 years. It's just making a generic statement. But now verse 12, and behold, I come quickly, my reward is with me. That's describing him coming at his second coming. So verse 12 is not talking about the Messianic era. Verse 12 is not talking about eternity. Then verse 13 is a declaration.
Could we cover in verse 12, behold, I am coming quickly. Another scholar said in quick succession. So when we get to that point, it's going to be the pace is going to quicken. Would that make sense to you?
The pace definitely is going to quicken, because the end of the exile is likened unto a birth pain, and the pace quickens as we come to the birth.
Because it's been 2,000 years, and quickly doesn't quite work. But some of the other scholars are saying taxu in this case would be more like it's going to hasten when it hastens.
No, that is now I didn't look up the word, but what you just said is how I would understand the concept. What you just said.
Okay. Because people are going to wonder, when we say quickly, what does that mean after 2,000 years? But I talk to Haller all the time, and we can't keep pace with all the news stories right now. It's overwhelming how many things are occurring. And so the pace is quickening. So, don't get run over by the horses.
So Revelation 22:13 is a declaration. It's not. I'm the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the end, the first and last. It's just a declaration. It's the same declaration that was made in chapter 1. Chapter 1, same declaration that's made in chapter 1 and verse 8.
Yep.
Okay, now verse 14 is just a general statement that says, blessed are people that do his commandments. Like you right now doing his commandments, I doing his commandments, anybody that's listening into our audience, we're blessed if we do his commandments, because what's going to be the outcome if we keep his commandments? We're going to have a right to the tree of life, and we're going to enter into the gates of the city. In other words, if we do it faithfully, then our inheritance or our reward is going to be able to live forever in the heavenly Jerusalem. In other words, we will be that dwelling bride. We already did verse 15. Verse 16.
Let me just for a second here, Eddie. For those of you that are studying in the King James Version, be very, very careful in King James in these sections that Eddie just covered. You're getting it from the Latin. It's translated from the Latin into the Greek, and so be watchful when you're studying the King James in this particular section of 22. It's a mess.
Not all translations render that the same way. You're exactly right. You're exactly right.
Yeah, it's problematic. Just remember that the revelation in the King James is not as specific as the Greek.
Okay, verse 16.
Yep.
I, Yeshua, have sent my messenger to testify to these things in the churches, that I'm the root and the offspring of David, the bright and the morning star. So that's a declaration of, what he was told to do back here in Revelation chapter 2. So verse 16 is not a statement about the Messianic era or a statement about eternity. It's a statement to John from Yeshua of what he is testifying to at least some elements of it in John's vision as recorded in the book of Revelation. So then it says, verse 17, and the Spirit and the bride say, come, let him that hears say, come, let him that's thirsty come, and whoever will, let him take of the water of life freely. So that's just an invitation verse. And that invitation verse, applies to now. And it's going to apply. The invitation is not only now, but the invitation is also going to be during the 1,000 years. All right. So, for I testify unto every man that hears the words of the prophecy of this book, if any man shall add unto these things, God will add unto him the plagues that are written. That's just like a summary statement, in finishing up what he's writing about and telling people don't mess with it, And so that verse 18 is not a statement about time, that verse is speaking about the millennium or eternity. And so then he says, if any man shall take away the words of the book of this prophecy, God will take away his part of the book of life out of the holy city and from the things that are written. He which testify these things says, surely I come quickly, even so come Lord Yeshua. So he's just, ending it. So really, it's only the first 5 verses of Revelation chapter 22 that Doug made the argument that he believes at least, let's say verse 2 is speaking about the Messianic era, which I said, okay, I'm good with that. But it also at the same time is speaking about eternity. So verses 1 to 5 have a time reference, but the other ones are just information.
Okay. Yep. Doug likes that. He's not a big chronological guy. I want to go chronological, but it doesn't work all the time, obviously. Certain things like I hope the seals are chronological, I hope the trumpets are chronological, and the bowls are chronological, but there are narrative breaks everywhere.
Well, the book of Revelation is, let's just be honest, I mean, it's got a lot of pauses, it's got a lot of reduplications where we go back and we see it again, then we see it again. And all I point out is that I think there are big chronologies. Like, I think that events at the end of the book are happening toward the end of all things. I would say that chapter 21 and 22 are all generally speaking of the Messianic age, the millennium, and I don't disagree with you either. I mean, I agree that it's also looking into eternity. I'm with that. But my argument is that the New Jerusalem comes down to planet Earth at the beginning of the millennium versus happening after. And I know a lot of people don't see it that way, but I really think it puts everything together.
I'm going to say it's both. And in order to affirm your argument, now it doesn't use the words New Jerusalem, but to affirm your argument, if we go to Isaiah chapter 66, let's see if I can find it. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22. As for the new heavens and the new earth, which I will make, and it will come to pass that from one new moon to another, from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, says the Lord. Now, I believe verse 23 is talking about the Messianic era, verse 23. And so the context of referring to the Messianic era, verse 23. So the Messianic era is labeled a new heaven and a new earth.
Yep.
So if it's a new heaven and new earth,
and the same in chapter 65.
So if it's a new heaven,
I'm with you.
If it's a new heaven and a new earth, it's a new Jerusalem. Okay.
Doug, did you say Isaiah 65? You're cutting out.
Yeah. Isaiah.
Yeah, that's what I thought you said.
So I'm trying to affirm what Doug said. Okay.
Yeah. We just can't hear him properly.
Right here, the Messianic era is called a new heaven and new earth.
Okay.
Well, if it's a new heaven and new earth, it's a new Jerusalem. So when he's trying to say the Messianic era is a new Jerusalem, he's right.
Okay.
I'm just saying it's also not rather than, it's also after the 1,000 years is a new heaven and new earth in the new Jerusalem. It's not one or
Okay.
the
Yep.
other,
I'm with you.
is what I'm trying to
Okay.
say.
Yeah.
So I'm not disagreeing with him. I'm not disagreeing on the point that he made.
So let me read it. I
Yeah.
think this is what you're talking about, Doug. Verse 18 from 65 of Isaiah. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create. For I will create Jerusalem to be a delight and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and crying will not be heard in it, or will not be heard in it anymore. So, okay, so
Yeah.
that's where you're going then? That is that millennial time frame.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what I kept running into when I was studying the new heavens and earth and the millennium is like all the dispensational teachers, like they didn't even look at Isaiah. And in fact, some of them are like, oh, Isaiah has no clue what he's talking about. I mean, I think it was Barnes that
Oh,
was saying that, or
okay.
one of these guys, I forget. But I'm like, maybe you're missing the point, because
Right.
I just think we have to got to take obviously the New Testament, but clearly we got to take the Tanakh. And we've got to, start with the foundation passages first, and then let the book of Revelation and others help interpret those books. Because, Isaiah is telling us some pretty amazing things. And, I was always trying to figure out, okay, where does the New Jerusalem fit into the millennium? According to dispensational teachers, it's going to be hovering like the Death Star, up around over Earth for 1,000 years, and Jesus is going to be commuting to work every day. He's going to be up there with his bride during the night. But then he's coming back here to hang out with the Jews, and I'm
So
like, this doesn't even
the
work,
Jews are
man.
going to be separate from the Christians, huh? Okay, I hadn't thought about that. That's how they sell that.
Well, that's what they do, because they have this wall that goes up forever. Never the twain shall meet. You're not
Oh,
going to have Jews and Christians hanging out together. Not according
wow.
to dispensationalism. I'm being facetious here, but that's essentially what they're saying. And so they have the New Jerusalem up above the earth, just kind of orbiting up there. And I'm like, that is just weird, and it's incorrect. And then they have it as a cube when it's not a cube, it's a mountain. It's more like a pyramid shape. And it belongs on planet Earth, because that's where it all started out. It all started on planet Earth, where heaven and earth, heaven being the spiritual domain, and earth, of course, is here. Those are all one and the same before the fall. And then
Okay.
when the fall happened, death, decay, degeneration came in. God's fiery presence could not dwell with man without, nuking us all. And so God basically put himself in this kind of timeout, this spiritual timeout, so he wouldn't kill us. And we haven't been able to really look upon the glory of God ever since. And he's going to reverse all of that. And, so, Eddie, what I'm doing is I'm really focusing more on the physical properties of the New Jerusalem. You're talking about a lot of wonderful spiritual principles that are wonderful.
That's
And
true.
so I'm not so much
Yeah.
focusing
Okay.
on. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of like, okay, when does the New Jerusalem come down to planet Earth? And so that's my take on this whole thing. And I would agree with you. This is where I think, again, what I grew up with dispensationalism is they want to make quote unquote heaven. They want it to start after the 1,000 years. And I'm like, no, I disagree with that. I think there's this, it's kind of a transitionary period, but if you have your new body, you're in, you're in. You get to be in the New Jerusalem. You get to also walk on the planet. It's all great. And then there are still some people that have not fully transitioned. Okay. And talk about a good transition. They have not gotten their new bodies yet. And they have upwards of 1,000 years. They get to sort of make their choice. Some are going to make a really bad choice, believe it or not. After 1,000 years of hanging out with King Jesus, they're going to say, gosh, I wish we had someone that could, champion our cause. And then lo and behold, here's Satan, and they're going to say, oh, great, let's follow this guy. And they're going to attack which city? The New Jerusalem. And so that's what I just spent a lot of time looking at, is like, okay, how do we actually make sense of all these things? instead of the dispensational model that says, no, the 1,000 years, and then Jesus is going to nuke the planet after that. And I'm like, no, he already nuked the planet when he came back. The planet was devastated at the return of Christ, right? Every mountain fell, every tower fell. I mean, it's a complete bloodbath. Speaking of blood, all the oceans turned to blood. This place is a mess. I wouldn't want to live on planet Earth. And so he's going to restore the earth. Now, it may happen in a more, kind of a slower process. That's where the waters of the rivers of life are going out from the throne of God.
Okay.
They're now touching the earth. So it may not be instantaneous change, but over that 1,000-year period, there is this earth is being restored, and people that are still mortal are going to be able to be restored. So, clearly, when we get to the end of the 1,000 years, it's done, right? But it's a transition, and I would argue that in large part the earth is pretty much fixed. And you can also look at Romans chapter 8 if you want to go there. That's a pretty amazing passage.
He did go there.
Romans 8. Yeah, did you already? Maybe I missed it.
Well,
but
go there
Romans
again. That's
8,
fine. Yeah.
Verse 19. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. All right, so creation is waiting for us to be revealed, obviously in our new bodies. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it in hope, because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body. So when we get our new bodies, the earth gets its then liberated from this bondage of corruption. And, we get our new bodies when Christ comes back at the time of the resurrection. So that's when the earth is going to be restored, I would argue. And I think that's when the New Jerusalem comes down. I mean, it just fits so much better, but not everybody gets to go into the New Jerusalem. And, John makes that abundantly clear in Revelation chapter 21, when he talks about the New Jerusalem, and it says, and the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of earth shall bring their glory into it. Verse 27, there shall by no means enter it anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life. So, you have to have a new body. You have to have taken of the river of life and the tree of life. And then you can enter into the gates, into the New Jerusalem. Otherwise, you could stay outside the gates and you can keep living your mortal life. And again, by mortal, it's not that everyone's croaking all the time. It's just that you have the potential of death. But you need, just like Adam needed to take of the tree of life in order to live forever. I don't think he was dying by any stretch, right? But he wasn't exactly guaranteed to live forever either until he took of the tree of life. And so that seems to be, priority number one, is that people need to take of the leaves of the tree of life. But they can only do that if they take of the river of life and they're cleansed from their iniquity. So I don't know. I see, it's the same basic. Yeah.
I'm going to agree what he said and take the words that he said and use different language to come to the same conclusion. Okay. I agree what you said. Sure. I'm going to use different words to state the same conclusion, to state the same thing that you already said. All right. So he basically said that you're going to have, the New Jerusalem, the river of life, the people that, all this. Now, the term that I have for those people, and you said they're going to have resurrected bodies. I agree. So the term for those people is, in order to make the clarity, the dwelling bride. And that dwelling bride is going to receive her resurrected body at the second coming of the Messiah. So I'm taking everything that he just said, agreed with it when he's describing that there's a people. Then he said, that then there's other people that are there. So I'm agreeing with that. So I'm just giving a name to the people that he's talking about that are holy. They're in the New Jerusalem that are doing this and that. And I'm giving a name, and I'm calling the name of those people his dwelling bride. Okay. And then these other people that he's talking about, to affirm and to agree with that. And back to Isaiah 65, when we were at, in Isaiah 65, in describing those people that are living on the earth, it says in verse 20, and there shall no more an infant of days, nor an old man that has not fulfilled his days, for the child shall die 100 years old, but the sinner being 100 years old shall be accursed. It's describing those people that are living in the kingdom, that were born in the kingdom, that do not have their glorified bodies. And the ones that's got the glorified bodies is his bride, and his bride is going to initially rule and reign with him in the 1,000 years, but then she's going to continue to rule and reign with him for all eternity.
So here's the question from Russ White. Not all believers will rule and reign with Christ during the 1,000-year reign. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree.
Okay, so how do we determine? I mean, obviously Yeshua determines it, but how do you think it would be determined that these believers will have this particular activity to do, or particular holiness, we'll call it maybe? How would you know?
Well, when you're talking about a particular duty
or holiness or whatever,
he's going to have to give us our particular duty, but we're going to have the principle of ruling and reigning. Okay. So he may give me an assignment in ruling and reigning that's a different assignment than you, but we're both ruling and reigning. Okay. So let's say, for example, for the sake of argument, he's given me assignment that I'm going to be ruling and reigning over a particular country. Well, you're going to be ruling and reigning, over a different country than me, but we're both ruling and reigning over a country. I'm just giving you a for example. Okay. And so, the who then is that bride that gets resurrected and ruling and reign? The Bible only describes her spiritual characteristics. One of many spiritual characteristics is she's a bondservant. She also has the spiritual characteristic of the Greek word is teleos and the Hebrew word is tamim. It's got the spiritual characteristic of spiritual maturity. She's spiritual, the carnal. I could not speak unto you spiritual.
Did you say tamim or tamid?
Tamim, T-A-M-I-I-M. Okay.
Yeah, like Tom.
So Paul refers to the spiritually mature as spiritual. Okay.
Yep.
So a couple examples where he's referring to that bridal characteristic is 1 Corinthians in chapter 3, where he says, I could not speak unto you unto spiritual, but as unto carnal. So there's a distinction between the carnal and the spiritual. And like I said before, the carnal, you can be a carnal and being a babe in Messiah, spiritual. So then also in, I believe it's 1 Corinthians. Oh, let's see. Is it chapter? Yeah, chapter 2, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6. We speak wisdom to those that are, there's that Greek word, teleos, perfect, mature, yet not the wisdom of this world. And to the spiritual, verse 7, we speak the wisdom of God in a deeper meaning, at a deeper level. Not just pashat, at a deeper level. Here translated as a mystery, and so he uses the distinction between these two. And back to Romans chapter 8. All right, Romans chapter 8, where he says, To be spiritually minded is chai and shalom. Okay, so the bride, the dwelling bride, is spiritually minded, and
Okay.
she walks in chai and she walks in shalom. She's
Life,
teleos.
peace.
She's tamim.
Okay.
She lives her life as a bond servant.
Okay.
And she has she walks by the Spirit of God. She has the fruit of the Spirit of God. So you have
Okay.
all the characteristics of maturity, and that is the dwelling bride that's going to be receiving the resurrected body that's going to rule and reign with Messiah initially in the 1,000 years, and then after the 1,000 years for all eternity.
Okay, so can you answer this question from Bahir Malak? There will be those who are not grafted into Israel because they're still the nations. Can you see that, Eddie?
Everyone for the Messiah is in covenant relationship with the house of Jacob. Okay. In Exodus 19, verse 3, the people at Mount Sinai is called the house of Jacob. In Luke chapter 1, 32 and 33, Messiah is going to rule over the house of Jacob forever. So the alternative name for Jacob is Israel. And so the way that you become a part of grafted in, the way that you become a part of Israel, is to receive the Messiah. And everyone who receives the Messiah gets grafted into Israel. We're talking about spiritual. This is a spiritual thing that's happening.
Has to be spiritual, right?
So spiritually, I've been grafted into Israel. So spiritually, I'm Israel.
Okay.
But I physically could be living in the nations.
Oh, okay. Now,
there's a difference between the physical and who I am spiritually.
But inside this New Jerusalem, there's only 12 doors, and those are all the gates of the sons of Israel, of Jacob. So then if you want to, use a door, you have to enter and exit through that particular tribe. So then how can you be part of the nations and still enter and exit?
Okay, so in Revelation and Revelation chapter 21, so you have to have this concept I've been talking about is the concept of being the dwelling bride, okay, and that there's levels of
grafted
holiness.
in. Sure.
Okay, so in Revelation 21, verse 24, it says, "The nations which are saved." What nations are these? These are the people that's not the dwelling bride. So the people that's not a dwelling bride is called a nation. And the people that are saved but not the dwelling bride, in other words, they have a lower level of holiness than the dwelling bride, they will walk in the light of it, or they will walk in the light of the New Jerusalem, or they will walk in the light of the bride who dwells in the New Jerusalem. And then the kings of the earth to bring their glory and honor unto it. So this is a people that's not the dwelling bride that's honoring the dwelling bride.
Interesting. Okay.
And the people that's not the dwelling bride is called, in this particular application, they're called a nation.
Ethnic groups. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I had never thought about it that way. I don't know. I just kind of thought it was one big happy family, but you're saying there will be differences. There will be a little bit of separation between certain ethnic groups and those that are the bride.
Yeah. And like I said, in order to convey this concept, it was 28 years ago, I wrote a book to try to convey the concept. Because there's not many people that have the concept, because the concept really isn't, I'm not saying that it never has been taught in the church, but most church folk, if you talk to them, that they won't have the understanding of the concept, because the church basically brings it down to the lowest level. Just believe in Yeshua so that you're good, okay?
Yep.
And so they don't teach like Paul said in Philippians. Now look what Paul is describing about himself and about his walk in Messiah. Okay, we're going to go to the book. We're going to go to the book of Philippians.
Sure.
And we're going to go to chapter 3. Okay.
Okay.
Now Paul is already a believer in Messiah. He's already given his life for the Messiah and for his kingdom. So you might say that he's living a spiritually mature life, okay,
Sure.
in his ministry, okay? So that being the case, because his life hasn't ended,
Okay.
then he's still pursuing it, and he may be walking in it, but he hasn't completed it, okay?
Okay.
So that being the case, here's what he says. Paul's praying about himself in Philippians chapter 3, verse 10. It says that I might know him. That is the Messiah, that I might know him. And look what he's praying to know. Now that word know is going to be in Hebrew, to know intimately. He's praying to know the power of his resurrection. He's praying to know the fellowship of his suffering. He's praying to be conformable unto his death. He's not talking about he's going to die on the cross. He's talking about spiritual concepts here. And now he's talking about the spiritual concept of the resurrection of the dead. So he's saying in order to obtain the resurrection of the dead, that spiritual level called the resurrection of the dead,
Yep.
that I have to, when I'm living my life, I got to die to the flesh. Okay. When I die to the flesh, then if I fully die to the flesh, then in my service to God and endeavoring to do his will, while I'm in dying to the flesh, I'm going to be in my service raised to glory. In other words, what I've called to do in the purpose and plan he's given me is going to be fulfilled. And so he says that I might attain the resurrection of the dead. And then he said, now this spiritual level of the resurrection of the dead, it says, not as though I had already attained the spiritual level of the resurrection of the dead. Either were already perfect. So notice what he equated to the resurrection of the dead. He equated the resurrection of the dead to be, the English says perfect, but it's the Greek word teleos, or a form of teleos, a teleatos, and it's the corresponding word in Hebrew of tamim. It means spiritually mature. So Paul is striving, he's not striving to believe in Messiah. He's striving to believe in Messiah and be spiritually mature. Okay. So then he says, brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended what? Spiritual maturity. He says, but I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Messiah, a high calling. So what's the high calling in Messiah? To be spiritually mature. What is an alternative? To be a babe in Messiah, to be carnal. So spiritual maturity is doing what Messiah did in the example that he gave. Spiritual maturity is as I'm living my life, as you're living your life. You're living your life unto the Messiah, unto his kingdom. And in living your life, you are laying down your life. You're laying down your life for somebody. You're laying down your life for your family. Or it might be said that in order to do this recording, there's people listening to this recording, right?
Sure.
Well, in order for you to bring forth this recording, you had to give up the last hour and a half of your time. You could be doing something else, but now you are giving up your time, hopefully for the benefit of a listener who's going to grow and glean and grow closer to God and his kingdom through being inspired by this broadcast and the things that we're conveying. It's going to inspire them to draw closer to God, and us doing this act of providing this teaching, explaining these things to help people. We are in this context, we are laying down our lives. Okay. And so it's only by laying down our lives, that's the only way that we can attain spiritual maturity in the spiritual level of resurrection of the dead. Because in the literal, Messiah had to suffer, and he had to crucify his flesh. So in the literal, his flesh got crucified, but it's showing you a spiritual principle that his death on the tree represented doing the will of God in his life. So what he's showing us in the literal is, in order to do the will of God, which is spiritual, it requires for us to crucify our flesh. So he was crucified. Sure. And to lay down our life, he laid down our life. It requires us to enter into suffering. But if we do that in the context of seeking to do the will of God in our life, we will be raised to glory like he was raised to glory. So using what Messiah showed us in the literal is what Paul is applying the literal to his spiritual life, and he's applying the literal concepts that are being taught to his spiritual walk, and connecting that if he does do this, if he's spiritually mature, he's going to be at the spiritual level of knowing Messiah.
Sure.
And he's going to be at the spiritual level of maturity. Now, you may be walking in it, but until your life is over, you still have a possibility to fall and fail. You have
Right.
to be faithful to the end. And Paul was praying that he would be
Right.
faithful to the end. That's why he said, I haven't attained because my life's not yet over. And he gave an example elsewhere that, when you run a race, you run it to win it, because there's only one that wins the race, and the one that wins the race gets a crown.
Right.
So he was using the example of a marathon or running some kind of a race, and applying it to how we're supposed to spiritually walk in Messiah. We're supposed to live our lives like we're running a race, and that we're running the race to win, because if we complete the course, if we win the race, we're going to receive a crown. It's the crown of glory. It's a crown of life. It's a crown of rewards. And that's, Paul was not striving to be a believer. He was striving to have spiritual maturity so that he could be one of those that ruled and reigned with Messiah.
Okay. So, Allison, this always helps me when I am getting lazy and tired. It's like a jump start for my spiritual battery. So basically what Eddie is saying is we don't have our resurrected bodies yet. We're not in the millennium. None of those things have occurred yet. We're still teaching Torah, but we can still work at that spiritual nature now and achieve some of that right now.
Exactly.
So it's a foretaste of what's coming, right, Eddie?
Yeah. So in one way, that's the meaning of I'm supposed to live in the reality of the kingdom and all of its spiritual elements and aspects today, now, as I live my daily life, and contending with this world, this physical world that battles against me.
So if you live in Syria right now, and they're coming for the Alawites, and next they're going to come after the Christians, and they're probably the Byzantinian type Christians, and you believe in Yeshua, you might call God Allah in their language, but basically they're coming for you. You can still be more spiritual at this point in time, as you know oppression is coming.
Well, yeah, it is a great and a high level of spiritual maturity that you're willing to lay down your life for the faith. There was somebody, I just got a thing on Telegram or whatever, that a Christian over there in Syria was asked to convert to Islam, and he said no, and they killed him.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Well, that is a high level of spiritual maturity, to be willing to give your life for Messiah and be willing to die and give up your life for him. That a carnal person ain't going to do that.
Right, exactly.
So there's going to be a big reward for somebody like him, that in the context of extreme danger that I don't want to experience. But anyhow, there's going to be a big reward that he was able to stand strong in Messiah, in the realm of that environment.
I hate to do this to you because you're doing a great job on 22, but there is this section in chapter 20 where it seems as though the martyrs are resurrected first, and rule during the millennium first. Would you agree with that?
Well, I believe the martyrs then are going to be a part of, I might say it, the bridal people.
Okay, because there is a special blessing in being a martyr.
There is.
And
my belief system is, according to a verse that's in Revelation, that martyrs get to be around the throne of God.
I think you're right. Yeah. Because of Revelation chapter 6, verses 9 through 11, the fifth seal, you see them calling out and saying, "Oh Lord, holy and true, how long before you judge those that shed our blood?" Basically, I'm paraphrasing it, obviously.
Well, I'm going to tell you what I personally believe, and it doesn't matter if somebody agrees with me or disagrees with me. The way I view the death of my parents, which happened 10 years ago, They were murdered, and the way I view them is, I honestly believe that they were murdered as a part of a spiritual battle between light and darkness,
Yep.
and that they died as martyrs in
Okay.
in the battle between light and darkness, and that in dying as martyrs,
Yep.
they're going to receive the reward of being around the throne of God, as it says in Revelation.
Okay.
And
So,
actually, me viewing it that way, believing it that way, actually helped me in the mourning process
sure.
regarding the terrible tragedy that happened, because I believe the Lord spoke to me one day. There's got to be, of course, a time of mourning and whatnot, but when that time of season of mourning is over, I believe the Lord spoke to me and said that I thought, oh, why am I going to continue to mourn and be sad? I mean, I wish they were here physically. I will always wish they were here physically, but why do I have to perpetually mourn what
oh, that's
happened?
Scott.
Because because they're going to be around the throne, and that's a high honor.
Okay. Now it says here in the fifth seal, they're under the altar. I don't know which altar it would be. Would it be the brazen altar, or would it be the golden altar? Which one?
I believe it's going to be the altar that's associated with the throne of God.
Okay.
All right. So that those there are I believe it's describing all martyrs of Messiah in every generation. It includes the tribulation martyrs. It includes them, but
it has to. Yes, they get a special blessing, right?
But it's not isolated to them.
Okay.
It's martyrs in every generation that are crying out.
Will it be Jewish martyrs prior to Yeshua?
Yeah, if they were a martyr for the kingdom, then you're a martyr for the kingdom. Like what we're told that Isaiah was sawed in two, right, or whatever.
Yep.
Well, he was a martyr. He was a martyr,
okay.
So he's going to be one of those around the throne that's crying out, "How long till you avenge?"
Okay. Interesting.
And it says in the judgment of Babylon, he's avenged the blood of the prophets.
Okay.
All right,
interesting.
So they're crying out, "How long till you avenge?"
Right.
And so this is when he avenges, is when he judges Babylon. He avenges the blood of the prophets, because in Babylon is we have the blood of the prophets, etc., which would include Isaiah.
Okay. And I can't remember, is that the end of chapter 16 then, when he avenges after Babylon? I know he turns his mind to Babylon at the end of 16, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, it's in Revelation there. So
yeah, don't worry.
I remember it's there, but I don't go to it as so frequently that I got the verse memorized.
Yeah, I don't have it memorized either, but that's fine. Okay, so bottom line is there are going to be different types of people during this time frame in chapter 22. There are going to be holy, holier, holiest, and also some dogs and sorcerers and people outside of the city, right?
Yeah, yes, because remember we got Matthew 5:19. There's those that are least in the kingdom and those who are great in the kingdom.
Okay.
So not everyone's equal. And then to repeat 1 Corinthians chapter 15, how are the dead raised up? In what body they come in verse 35? It says in verse 41, there's one glory of the sun, one glory of the moon, another glory of the stars. For one star differs from another star in glory, so is the resurrection of the dead. So what is common in the description is glory of the sun, glory of the moon, glory of the stars, differing in glory. So glory, 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 glory. So is the resurrection of the dead. So we're gonna have a glorified body. But that glorified body is going to give forth different levels of light, because these bodies all give out light, but not the same light. So they differ in glory. And glory is a poetic way. Glory is a prophetic way of saying your service unto God while you lived on this life unto his kingdom. That's the glory. How you're differing in glory. It's differing in your service.
Okay. Scott, do you have any questions?
No, Eddie, I agree. There's going to be hierarchies in the kingdom. There's going to be, those I believe that are those that are the overcomers and use the gifts that we have been given to His glory are going to receive more honor and glory in the kingdom. So I would agree. Again, I'm not on the throne making that decision. So
Well, neither am I, and
no,
that is the decision of the Messiah, because
correct.
he and he alone is going to properly judge the thought and the intent of the heart. So
So
that's his decision on behalf of the Father.
So Lisa is saying that's what she thinks, all martyrs, not just tribulation martyrs. So interesting. Okay. So we seem to agree on that, and that I had never thought about the different levels of holiness. But that makes sense. It's biblical. It's just I don't know. I don't know if it's on the Peshat level or the Sod level or whatever, but it's there. Okay, I get it.
So as it says in the Talmud, in this case, I'm quoting the Talmud and the rabbis because on this particular example, I agree with them. Okay,
Okay,
so they say Israel is a higher level of holiness than the nations, and then they say that Jerusalem is a higher level of holiness than Israel itself.
Okay.
And then they say the Temple Mount is a higher level of holiness than Jerusalem, and then
Okay.
the temple is the highest level of holiness. And so they espouse the concept of levels of holiness.
And you would separate, and the nations are people that don't know Torah, don't keep Torah, things like that. Israel are people grafted in, like you would say from Romans 11, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it's possible for all of us believers.
What's possible?
To be grafted into Israel per Romans 11.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah, and I would just throw in that a part of that, sort of what's been on my heart lately, is the overcomers, those that are mentioned in Revelation 2 and 3, and then those that do overcome during this time period and are able to come out of the two sisters, the two Babylonian religions of what I believe are Christianities and Judaisms. Those are the ones. Again, you've got to have the spirit, you have to have the heart and the love for others, but you also have to love His way and only seek Him as opposed to the traditions of men. So I believe that's going to be maybe a dividing line as we approach the end of this age, coming out of the two sister religions. So I don't know what Eddie's thought on that is.
Well, yeah. So I've made this statement. So the statement is parallel in thought to what you just said. Okay. So that in the Messianic era, when the Torah is being taught by the Messiah from Jerusalem, it's not going to be the present system of Judaism. The present system of Judaism is in that system is going to cease to exist. The Greco-Roman Christianity, dispensational Christianity, is going to cease to exist. Okay. So our Greco-Roman Christianity is a faith in Messiah that is associated with the time of exile. Judaism is a Jewish expression that doesn't believe in Messiah, and it's being represented in its present form during the exile. But when Messiah comes, what we're going to be walking in and the understanding of is not the present structure of Judaism nor the present structure of Christianity. It's what the scripture may call a new thing. I'm going to do a new thing in the earth. So it's going to be, for lack of a better way of describing it, it's going to be the actual true and authentic faith that we're going to be practicing once Messiah is here himself and teaching us the ways and the doctrines of the true and authentic faith. We won't be walking in the true faith in its fullness until Messiah is here teaching us.
Yeah.
And I would agree with that. Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that I do believe right now there is a major shift in the spirit. I'm seeing it in many brothers and sisters in which they are at least striving to return best we can right now in this age, as you're referring it to it. Well, obviously, we don't have Yeshua on the throne right now. We don't have the Torah going forth from Zion, but we can the best as led by the Spirit and by the Scripture. His word is truth. Try to honor Him and worship Him doing His way, as opposed to the ways of either Christianity, Roman Greco Christianity, as Eddie is using that term, or Judaism. And so I believe there's a refining and purification process going in the body of Messiah right now, as people are learning and unlearning certain traditions of men and returning more back to truth of Scripture.
I agree. And I also agree that there is a remnant of people who's trying to pursue that truth, trying to research it out, trying to follow it in exile, the way and the best that they can and understand and know how. There is a remnant people that's pursuing that walk in that life. I completely agree.
Eddie, would you please turn to Isaiah 66, 19 through 20, maybe 20, or 18 through 20, and I'll read it while you're turning to it. And I, because of their actions and their imaginations, am about to come and gather all nations and tongues, and they will come and see my glory. I will set a sign among them, and I will send some of those who survive to the nations, to Tarshish, to Libyans, to Lydians, famous as archers in Tubal and Greece, and to the distant islands that have not heard of my fame or seen my glory. They will proclaim my glory among the nations. I'll continue on through 20. Here it is. And they will bring all your brothers from all the nations to my holy mountain in Jerusalem as an offering to the Lord, on horses and chariots and wagons, and on mules and camels, says the Lord. They will bring them as the Israelites bring their grain offerings to the temple of the Lord in ceremonially clean vessels. So during the millennium or after the millennium, so you're saying that the nations are going to be around after the millennium. In chapter 22, they seem to be there.
Well, nations not in the context of the nations by which we are living today in our present world.
Okay.
In Revelation 22, those nations, that term nations, in the context of Revelation 22, just there, I'm not talking about the use of the word everywhere in the Bible, but in the context there, the word nations is used to describe those that are in the kingdom, but are at a lower level of holiness than the dwelling bride.
Okay. I think you've made that point well. Okay, cool. So basically, that's what's going on here then. There are still those that are on a different level of holiness.
Yeah, I believe in one sense, Isaiah 16, 19, and 20 is describing the end of the exile. And then often when the end of the exile is described, it's describing as well the outcome of the end of the exile, which has two parts. First, the Messianic era, and then eternity. That's the outcome has two levels and two parts. Okay.
But the end of the exile is only for believers. The dogs, the sorcerers, that isn't the end of the exile for them.
The end of what's regarded as the physical exile in the nations, wherein the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom were sent into the nations for breaking the Torah. Okay. When the Messiah comes and ends that exile, ending the exile in that context means the nations will not be ruling over Israel.
Oh, that's where you're going. Okay. That ends the
and the end of the exile, Israel rules over the nations.
Okay.
So there still may be people that he didn't gather, because who he's gathering to end the exile is a remnant.
Okay.
So there's still going to be a people that's still living outside the land of Israel. Okay, but the our earth that we're living in will not be living with a people like the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, that are ruling over his people because they're being punished for disobedience to the Torah.
Interesting. I had
That
never really thought about that. I did one big mess of people at the end, and you're differentiating, which is in the text, obviously.
right.
Okay. I'm looking for questions here. Yeah, she did the same one, Isaiah 66:20. Yeah. So, thanks, Ray Ray. Okay, yeah, she's quoting from Isaiah 66 again. So I don't know. Here's the deal. We're 2 hours into this. My allergies just kicked in about an hour ago, and so I'm miserable. I want to take a decongestant or something like that.
Well, I bless anybody that is interested in this and its discussion. When they look and they see, oh, this is 2 hours. In order for me to watch this, I got to invest 2 hours, and they invest 2 hours just to see what it's like. I bless anybody who, in this era where we just want to listen to a video for 5 minutes, that if whoever's willing to listen to this discussion for this 2 hour discussion, I bless them that in their willingness to want to listen, learn, study, understand.
Yeah.
I pray that if they've now reached the end of the video, that they feel as though the time that they spent to listen, that they've benefited, and they'll be able to use this in their personal walk with Yeshua.
Okay. Well, we've come this far. We've covered through Revelation 22. Eddie, you did a fine job. You brought up some new concepts. I hope it's edifying for everybody. These are difficult topics to talk about, but it's all going to occur in our life, probably in our lifetimes. There will be martyrs too, and continue to pray for the Syrians, those poor, wonderful Syrians that are dying left and right, and they're believers too. People, you might call them Catholics, but they believe in Yeshua just like we do. So, that is the next task. The Alawites seem to be the first ones that are being attacked right now, but we're watching some aspects of the fifth seal right now in Syria. Okay. Thank you, Eddie. Anything else to say?
Nope. Just shalom and blessings, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on the show. And you be well till I see you again, or we do it again.
There you go. God bless. Okay, I'm going to end the stream. Thank you.